As usual, we're going to have to play a little bit with just logistics, get this setup thing going, and want everybody to know here that I really do not keep up with Facebook. Typically, I look at it about 3 times a year, and so I know I'm missing a lot of correspondence there. So let me just super emphasize, I encourage you to contact me, but it needs to be by phone or else through my email, and preferably the email so I can get back to you. Number 2, we got the Revelation booklets printed. I had a number of problems there too, but thanks to a very determined wife, a wonderful woman, Donna, she got them done. So if you would like to request the printed versions, then I can send those to you. It cost me half of the price plus just to ship them, just the mailing. So I'm charging $10 for each one, mostly just to cover that postage. But if you'll send me an email, we'll get those off in the mail for you. And then I'm just so sorry about last week. I got probably half a dozen calls or more when it was over. The last 35 minutes of that class I got, and I don't know how I feel about it. I got distracted by teaching. And that just seems such a wrong thing to say. But because I am juggling these numerous windows on 2 different screens, I got so fixated on what I was actually teaching that I didn't realize I wasn't broadcasting the PowerPoint slides for the last 35 minutes. So if you'd really like to see the class the way it was presented, as of Wednesday afternoon, that's last Wednesday afternoon, I went back in, spent a total of 10 hours and $260 on software, but I re-edited that whole recording and then put the slides back on top of it and reposted it. So if you'd like to see that class the way it was intended, just come to the Sumner Church of Christ YouTube channel, select the one from last week, the 21st, and it'll be reassembled for you. There is the way that it'll work. And then this is the slide, though, that everybody asked about. While I had quite a few slides that didn't appear, it was this last one that has so much crammed onto this single sheet that most people were interested in. So I can only give you a few seconds. We're quite a race here tonight. There's the full screen on it. But down the center column are these concepts or visuals, the images that are first spoken of in the blue column on the left that you see in Isaiah, 700 plus years before Christ. And then their correlatives, how it correlates to Revelation. Each of those chapters and verses in the third column there on the right have the very same imagery. I mean, just precisely the same imagery in many cases. And so we're going to capitalize on that quite a bit when we get to the end of the book of Revelation. As you can see, largely it's chapters 19, 20, 21 and 22 that are involved in this comparison between Isaiah and Revelation. So fear not, we'll come back to that in good time. And of course, if you'd like to send me an email, I did make a JPEG of that last slide so you can get it as a photograph. And of course, if you request the PowerPoint slideshow, you can have that whole slideshow as well. A number of you already have, so we've set that out into the wild, and I'd be happy to set some others free. Okay, what I'd like for you to see right now is how I feel overall about this particular class. I was in the 82nd Airborne way back in 1971 for a 3-week jump school in order to qualify to actually take those leaps out of those C-130 aircraft. I'll never forget my drill sergeant saying, "Well, boys, you're probably wondering why it's a 3-week school. So here's the deal. In the first week, we're going to separate the men from the boys. In the second week, we're going to separate the men from the idiots. And in the third week, the idiots are going to jump." Well, he got a good laugh. We all enjoyed the humor of it all. But I kind of feel like that here tonight. I am really facing a sort of a jumping off point, I'm imagining, for some of you. I've warned you, this is going to be a college level class. It's going to be very challenging, and tonight may well be, among the top 5 of the most challenging. We're going to cover a lot of material tonight. I am not going to answer a lot of your questions. I will answer some, I think. you'll be left with a head that's swimming a little bit, and that's all right, I hope, as I'll explain when we get to those particular slides. So let's go ahead and just plunge right on in. You've seen the title slide. We're going to try to take 2 full big chapters out of Daniel tonight, chapter 2 and chapter 7. Now here's my all-time favorite painting, artist's conception of Daniel there speaking in the presence of one of the soothsayers to King Nebuchadnezzar, who's had a terrifying dream in the night in chapter 2. And in this dream, he is so upset that he needs to have it interpreted in order to save his life. Daniel is finally called after all of the various wizards, have failed, and he's going to go ahead and interpret this dream. I am going to depend very much tonight on you to fill in a lot of blanks. I think for chapter 2, we're not going to have too much trouble. There's pretty well general agreement in chapter 2. When we get to chapter 7, that will likely not be the case at all. But here we go. Let's now run on over full screen again and have a look at the way that people interpret Nebuchadnezzar's statue. He saw this thing. He saw an imposing statue, a terrifying thing that had several different component and composite parts. I don't know where this particular image came from, but in their scheme of understanding things, Daniel 2's head of gold represents Babylon. And then the arms and the chest of silver is Medo-Persia. When we come to bronze, it's Greece. When we come to the legs of iron and the feet that are also mixed with clay, they see Rome. But when you talk about the feet in particular, you look at the bottom of this chart and it says Britain and the United States. And then I think, one of the wiser things they've put on this particular chart is a big question mark in a circle down there. Well, to say the least, having successive kingdoms in world history, which is abundantly verified in every historical book you've ever read, that Babylon starts a progression. Medo-Persia will conquer them. Greece will conquer the Medes and Persians. Rome will conquer Greece. But I don't remember Great Britain conquering Rome. I don't think the United States did either. All right, hold on just a second here. No, that's okay. You're hearing my phone ring, but I'm not going to pick up there. So we'll wait for that just to die down here for a second. And then here's somebody else's idea of what Daniel 2's statue represents. I like their image a lot better, and they come up with almost an identical interpretive idea. The head of gold is Babylon, with Nebuchadnezzar at the head, 605 to 539 for the kingdom, and then the breast and arms of silver is Medo-Persia, the dates are given. The belly and thighs of brass or bronze is Greece. The legs of iron are Rome. It's identical. And then you get down to those feet, and all of a sudden they've got papal Rome, so Roman Catholic Rome, and its Pope, and then modern nations of Egypt. And that ought to be, kind of a head scratcher. Well, how did we get all the way from Rome, which they're calling out? Most people think at the latest, it did not exist after 476 AD. And now here they're suggesting we should skip what? 1,500 years? 16? How can that be? And then here's my personal favorite. I like this one because it's actually printed in my Bible, right at full page, right at the end of the book of Daniel. So in my particular Bible's editors' minds, this is what Daniel 2 is talking about. And I realize in this case it's kind of hard to see because I just took the photograph out of my Bible today, as a matter of fact. But again, they say the head of gold is Babylon. Then we get Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Well, all three of these approaches, there's complete agreement until you get down to the feet. And you'll notice in this chart on the left, there's a big gap there. In fact, they label it the gap of time. And then they again have a question mark, not sure about what these feet are supposed to represent, but they're real sure that it has to be a long time after Rome falls in 476 AD. Well, to say the very least, I don't think so. So here's that great picture, Daniel with Nebuchadnezzar, and that particular representation of the statue. Let's see if we can't sort this out in Daniel chapter 2 by reading first verses 36 through 38. Now, I'm counting on you to be familiar with the first 35 verses. So here's the interpretation. This was the dream. Now Daniel says we'll tell you its interpretation. You, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. You are the head of gold. Well, when a prophecy is interpreted for us, and we know what it means. So it's not talking about Russia, not talking about China, not talking about countries, scattered around the world in space and time. It's talking about Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom of Babylon. It says so. Continuing then from the Babylonian Empire, which has been specified, to Daniel's next verse, verse 39 in chapter 2. After you, Nebuchadnezzar, will arise another kingdom inferior to you, then another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. Now, nobody sees any gaps yet. Everybody knows the history. This is Medo-Persia, no doubt about it. This is Greece, no doubt about it. Everybody understands it the same. So we have Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece. Then comes the next verse, Daniel 2:40's interpretation. Then there'll be a fourth kingdom, as strong as iron. Like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. So in some manner or form, this last fourth kingdom is going to be the end of the others, and that's certainly the Roman Empire. It is the Roman Empire. It's surely the Roman Empire. Every history book attests to that. We know that's the case. And now it continues, though, to these feet, these mysterious feet. Verses 41 through 43. In that you saw the feet and toes, partly of iron, and partly of clay and partly of iron, it'll be a divided kingdom. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong, and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw iron mixed with common clay, let me switch full screen, they will combine with one another in the seed of men. But they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. Now you look at that and see if you have got, now counting, 2,000 years of a gap between those ankles and those feet. Well, certainly there's nothing said about such a thing in there. And please note the singularity of these statements. It will be a divided kingdom. These are singulars, not plurals. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom, the same singular kingdom, will be strong, and part of it will be brittle. It's only one kingdom. Surely it's only one kingdom. It's a single kingdom that has component parts that are somewhat at odds with each other, but it's only one kingdom. Now look here, in Matthew chapter 12 and verse 25, isn't this, in history, as well as in the prophecy, and in the mouth of Jesus, exactly what we know about the Roman Empire? Jesus said in Matthew 12:25, any kingdom divided against itself is laid waste. In any city or house divided against itself will not stand. Well, that's why a lot of us are beginning to worry about Portland and Seattle, which I'm only a 45-minute drive away from. These are cities. They're not two cities. They haven't been divided yet. But we wonder what it's going to come to, because they're against themselves. Some people that are of a common city are divided against each other. It hasn't created two separate cities. It didn't create two separate kingdoms. It didn't put 2,000 years in the middle of the statue. But Matthew's telling us what Daniel is seeing in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Rome is going to be divided. Its people will not be unified, and therefore it'll crumble and it will fall. And that's exactly what happened in history. Here's the next verse in Daniel 2, verse 44. I've emboldened those first 5 words. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. I wonder how many kingdoms that'll be, which will never be destroyed. And that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Now, brethren, I know most of my audience is not coming out of the Baptist Church or the Seventh-day Adventists or the Jehovah's Witnesses or, the Methodists or most all, the denominational groups that are out there. They're often called, either Protestants or cults. But in all these very popular, millions and millions of people are in those religions. They have all decided to believe premillennialism, which we talked about a few classes back. So, since they're imbibing from that fountain, they've been taught this by their leaders, they read a verse like this, and they insert 2,000-year gap, and then they speak of the days of kings of our time, or they think that this is about to take place, soon. And therefore, in what I think is a colossal act of blasphemy, though I'm sure they don't realize it's blasphemy, they're saying that this eternal kingdom has not yet been set up, that it was not set up in the days of the Roman kings of so long ago, a kingdom that surely came to an end in 476 AD, 1,550 years ago. So we've got problems now with an interpretation that's at odds with history. So it just becomes a sort of, well, because you respect me and I went to a college, like Dallas Theological Seminary, and it's got a real big name and I got a PhD after my title, well, then therefore there's got to be a gap in there. There's no gap in the text. In the days of the Roman kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. Well, surely that's the church. And that kingdom will not be left for another, and it hasn't been. Pardon me while I cough. Oh, I'm sorry, I do get dried out on these. Okay, pardon me for that. I may need to resort to that a little bit to come yet. But this kingdom has not been left for another people. It's a spiritual kingdom. It can't be conquered like those other kingdoms could. It will crush, and it did put an end to all those kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. We don't have in our kingdom any similarity to those old ones. And what they were, what they long ago ceased to be, we're not going to see it, again, save perhaps to some degree for a very little while at the end of Revelation, when we hear about Satan being released to deceive the nations again. We'll come to that. We'll talk about that. But in the meantime, this is the church. It has to be the church. It's surely the church. And now I want to come to Daniel 2, verse 45. And by the way, in Colossians chapter 2, verse 13, I think it is. Excuse me, pardon me. It might be chapter 113. But you'll find the kingdom spoken of in the past tense. In other places, it came in the first century. No matter how popular a religion is that denies that, the scripture confirms that this church is the kingdom that was built in the days of those kings. Now, in Daniel 2:45, inasmuch as you saw a stone cut out of the mountain without hands, and it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. The great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. Now here I just would comment, note it does not say near, shortly, soon to come to pass. Later Daniel is going to be told to seal up the book because it's not near. We're looking at hundreds of years of physical, societal kingdom history, one after the other, as portrayed in a vision, a dream given to Nebuchadnezzar so long ago. And the interpretation is trustworthy. But we haven't talked yet about this part where that stone cut out with hands strikes these feet and destroys all of those kingdoms. And I want to back up now to the vision itself in verse 35, in the dream, not in the interpretive verses. There in Daniel 2:35 it says, "Then the iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so not a trace of them was found." How many Babylonians or Medo-Persians, or Greeks, in the sense of the old Grecian Empire under Alexander and his successors, or Romans, we don't have too many emperors today. Do you know? We don't know any, and not a trace of that. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Big as these other kingdoms were, none of them ever even got to North America. They didn't get to the whole earth. So in the picture, a stone destroys these kinds of kingdoms, creates an eternal kingdom, a spiritual kingdom that will grow and fill the entire earth. And there's just no doubt. Can there be any doubt? Has the prophecy failed? It didn't unfold the way the words say it will. We got to insert a gap that's never mentioned of 2 millenniums in there to get what we want because we don't understand it. Or is this great mountain Christianity? Well, it is. It's the only eternal kingdom there'll ever be. And that kingdom was established a long time ago. Now, let me look at my time. I've done great. I'm just so pleased with myself. Okay, now that's hurried. You call me and we'll talk about it in detail if you need to. But I would challenge you to just go read Daniel 2 on your own. Think about it. I didn't develop it very deeply. I only spent about 20 minutes on it. I know that's fast, but I need the time here for Daniel 7 because I'm determined to put a more difficult and a much bigger set of ideas before you this evening as well. So let's talk about the 4 beasts in Daniel chapter 7. But let me encourage you now, especially that I'll have to, give you short shrift on Daniel, that please navigate, if you will, to the Coburg Road Church of Christ. Just whatever search engine you use, most are Google, type in the search window, Coburg, C-O-B-U-R-G, Road Church of Christ. When you do that, it'll pop up looking exactly like this. And then you'll notice there's a line there for sermons. Now, if you clicked the larger, what's above it, Coburg Road Church of Christ instead, you're going to come to this. And in fact, either way, you're going to come to a screen that looks something like this. So if you came one way, you'll need to, what I've circled in red there, click that bar Sermons. If you came the other way by choosing Sermons first, it'll bring you to the actual screen that you see here. Either way, you'll come to this list and you want to select 2018. I was at Coburg Road for 7 years. In 2018, when you click on that, you'll get this. It'll start with December. So you're going to have to start scrolling down, 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 down. But there's a list, and when you get all the way down to July and August there's a list of everything I've preached for 7 years at Coburg Road. And right there on the 25th of July is when I taught a 1-hour class on Daniel 7. And on Daniel 8 a week later, Daniel 9 the week after that, Daniel 10, Daniel 9, the second part, that's what it is, Daniel number 10, but Daniel chapter 9 again, just to get the last parts. And then you can imagine if you now start scrolling up one at a time, you can select the progression all the way to the end of the book. Now, because of the nature of the book, I would heartily encourage you, jump out of the airplane and take the time this week. Listen to those classes. It'll help you greatly. I'm not going into that kind of detail tonight. I'm taking half a class to cover what took me a whole class the first time. You're not even getting half of the material really by the time I'm done here. And if you'll start getting ahead and thinking about 8, 9, and on to the end of Daniel 12, if you'll be reading those chapters, I wouldn't suggest you start with the first 6 chapters. A lot of it's just pure history. We just covered Daniel 2, but start at Daniel 7 and see if you could do some extracurricular work. Pretend you're a college student and you're serious about it. And so go and look, that's the wrong one. Go and look at these classes and listen to them. They'll help you enormously, I'm sure. But now for tonight, let's read this material first. In Daniel 7, I at least want to read all of it. So I'm going to start there in just a minute. And you can read along with me. I'll go ahead and put these charts up, and I'm just reading anyway, so maybe I will give you the full screen on it. So let's just get started now with Daniel chapter 7 in the first 3 verses. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed. Then he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts were coming up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, resembling a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were torn out by the roots before it. Behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. I kept looking until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vesture was like white snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending to him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court sat, and the books were opened. Then I kept looking. Because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking, I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. Well, brethren, already, obviously, this is starting to call to mind for us a number of ideas that we've been reading already tonight. And likely, if you're familiar with Revelation, it's calling to mind some concepts and ideas in visionary form that we find in the book of Revelation as well. You're understanding, I'm sure, why most everybody thinks that really you need to understand the Old Testament if you're going to get Revelation, and particularly Isaiah, Ezekiel, though we're not going to be studying Ezekiel in this class, and Daniel, which I'll spend more time on. But the similarities are starting to add up. And when they do, they start focusing for us the time frame, the progression. We're living now with Daniel, it would be about 2,500 years after Daniel. We could see all that history and how it unfolded. And we're Christians in his kingdom. We're not a part of Rome. We're not a part, of Greece, Medo-Persia, or Babylon. Assyria before them. We're in a spiritual kingdom. So let's now see if we can't start to wrestle again with these beasts. So I want to read again Daniel chapter 7. No, I'm sorry, I don't want to read it again. I want to think again about this vision in verses 2 through 14, and these amazing and odd and yet somehow kind of similar to these amalgamations of beasts that have been portrayed before us. So in Daniel chapter 7, we have this vision, and in it, I've counted, it took me quite a while, I had to do it more than once, I had to be careful with it. In this vision, we have 60 parts, 6 times 10, 60 of them. And only 8 of them are interpreted for us the way that Daniel 2 is interpreted. We're going to get some interpretation, but it's only 8 out of 60. Well, how about that? And we're going to get 8 things in the interpretation that were not even in the dream. It didn't appear in the dream. So in our interpretation, additional information is going to be given, and explanatory information is also going to be given. Now, we really have to hurry, and I understand it's challenging. Please go back, get twice as much material off the Coburg Road Church of Christ website. I haven't got this material posted on my own website yet, but that's coming. Here's our interpretation in verses 15 through 28. I'm going to summarize it for the lack of time, so we're not going to read the interpretation. I'll leave that to you as well. But here's the summary of it. We have 4 beasts, and they are 4 kings/kingdoms. Now, in fact, in a variety of ways and in other places as well, identifying a king with a kingdom and using the 2 terms interchangeably is well established. So we got 4 kings, we got 4 kingdoms. And the saints, though, whoever they are going in the future to receive and possess a kingdom. They're not only going to receive it, they're also going to possess it. 2 things are going to happen. In chapter 7 verse 23, the 4th beast equals a 4th kingdom, and it devours and treads and crushes the earth. In verse 24, there are 10 horns on that 4th beast, and they are kings. The horns are kings. In 24, the little horn, which is an 11th horn and therefore king, is going to subdue 3 of the horns. Read 3 of the kings. We were told that those 3 were among the 10 and they were kings. And so the little horn's an 11th, and 3 of those kings have to go away. Now in 725, the little horn, this 11th king, will blaspheme God and overpower saints. He overpowers the saints there, harking back to verse 21. Then again in 25, overpowering the saints for a most intriguing period of time. Times, and half a time. So looky there. Once again, we get information that will help us locate the fulfillment of the prophecy in real space and time, in material universe time. The kind of time that, I remember an album. What was the name of that group? Pink something, I think it was. Was talking about time. Pink Floyd and their famous album, Dark Side of the Moon. we're all intrigued by time, and now we've got time times and half of a time. Then in verse 26, there's a court that dethrones this 11th king, annihilates and destroys him forever. In 27, the saints receive an eternal kingdom. Now, I want you to be a good Bible student and really think about what is said there. The pre-existing saints will receive an eternal kingdom, and all dominions will serve the Son of Man. So a lot of questions come to mind, don't they? We want to know who the Son of Man is. We want to know what judgment this is. We want to know who the little horn is. We want to know what the three kings are that are subdued by that little horn. We want to know who the saints are. We want to know when the war takes place against them. We want to know, how and when and why they're overpowered, and what sense does that take place. We want to know when they will receive and possess the kingdom. And above all, it's this time, times, and half a time that will help us to figure out where in real time the prophecy was fulfilled, or if in fact never yet fulfilled 2,000 years later, 2,500 years later, we're still waiting. So a lot of questions there. All right, look, there's a great chart. And by the way, I've put up a lot of photographs that I just scavenged from the internet. When I can, I'll give the attribution on them. But I can't always. I don't know who posts them. I don't know where they come from. My kudos and deepest gratitude to whoever produces these charts that I'm discovering, all over the internet. But they're in cyberspace. Thank you. If anybody recognizes one of their charts and presumes, to feel bad about it, that I should do something about it, by all means, email me or give me a call, and I'll find a different chart. So I don't mean to offend anybody. But look at this. This just nails it. With Nebuchadnezzar's dream, we had Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And everybody seems to think so, except when you start playing games with the feet on the legs. And on the right, we've got Daniel 7. And it's the same thing. Surely it's the same thing. How could it be anything other than just a different vision talking about the same thing? It's about the passage of a far distant future, only some of which that Daniel will live through, but which will lead us to the coming of the Messiah, Jesus, who is going to present himself before God to receive dominion and power in an everlasting kingdom. It's got to be that. Surely it's that. And everything hinges really on the time references. If we can get the time reference right, then we'll be certain about what we're seeing in the prophecy as well. So note, in both visions, we got the same four kingdoms, and it ends with Rome, and they're just too similar to mistake it. And now we've got time, times, and half a time here in chapter 7. But look, if you go back now to Daniel 7 and look at verse 25. In Daniel 7:25, he'll speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One. He'll intend to make alterations in times and law. They'll be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. Now, if you like, you might want to make a note here next to Daniel 7. Probably better that you grab a piece of paper and start making some notes here, because this expression, time, times, and half a time, will prove not to be unique to Daniel. While it's introduced by Daniel, he's not going to get a sole claim, no trademark on this expression, because it's also found in chapter 12, in the last chapter of his book, at verses 6 and 7. Now we're going to wrestle a bit in a forthcoming class, and I haven't decided yet if I'm going to have 2 more classes in Daniel or just what I'm going to do. I know you need this, but I also know that I don't want to go and teach Daniel all over again an hour, of each class. So step up. You got a good parachute and you got a great reserve. Something else that my jump instructor taught me was the phrase, when in doubt, whip it out. You got a reserve chute, then if there's any doubt about the one that's, it's over your head, pull the other one, which is hanging on your belly there. When in doubt, whip it out. Get that reserve chute, floating. Well, okay. If you'll gather up these verses, listen to my classes, you'll be like a college student who does not listen to one class, go home, ignore everything, never read anything in a textbook, and come back the next week, think he gets it. You just can't get it that way. So I'm begging you, do your homework. And your homework includes my classes on Daniel that are on the Coburg Road Church of Christ's website. Do that work. Now in chapter 12, in verses only 6 and 7, though, think about this. One said to the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river, "How long will it be until the end of these wonders?" And I heard the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river as he raised his right hand and his left toward heaven. And he swore with both hands by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. And as soon as they finished shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. That is an awesome verse. That says things that should not be at all difficult to understand, really. We get a lot of ridiculous ideas put in our heads from our infancy, and they're hard to shake. We get real certain that because we've believed a thing for a long time and the person that taught it to me is a highly respected, very capable Bible student who may have every other passage in the whole Bible right, but he just might not have this one right. Batting 1,000 is tough to do for anybody, and I'm not there yet. So look, 12, 6, and 7, time, and half a time. All of these things will be finished. The end of these wonders will be finished when the shattering of the power of the holy people is ended at the end of time, times, and half a time. Now, let me just say, again, virtually every commentary I've ever read is the only reasonable thing that makes sense, and that's why everybody keeps coming to it. Time apparently represents 1 year. Times represents 2 years. And half a time represents 6 months. Time, times, and half a time was apparently a colloquial expression in that century that meant 3.5 years. We're going to see much corroborating evidence in our New Testaments, especially so that we can have great confidence in that interpretation. I'll just insert it at this point. But lo and behold, and let me go full screen for you again. Looky there. I will now read from Revelation. This is why you got your note-taking going on, because when it's first introduced, this expression in Daniel 7 verse 25, you want to make a list there at Daniel 7:25 of all the places this expression is used, and then you'll want to go to 11 of the Revelation in the first 3 verses and write Daniel 7:25 and 12, 6, and 7 and the rest of those. And then at every place where this expression occurs in your Bible, make your own little concordance. In the margin, put the list of every other place this expression exists. But that's a pretty key expression in Daniel's book. Everything's coming to an end there in Daniel's book with this expression. Now read Revelation 11, 1 through 3. There was given me a measuring rod, like a staff. And someone said, "Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it. And leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it. For it has been given to the nations," the ethnos in plural Greek, the plural nations, the common expression that is usually translated Gentiles, non-Jews. It has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. You got your pencil? 42 months. You might want to go back and look at Luke chapter 21 verses 20 through 24 and verse 32. I'm not going to do it tonight. We'll do it again later. Not tonight. But in Revelation 11 through 3, at least write them down next to verse 2. Luke 21, 20 through 24, and verse 32. In verse 3, I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they'll prophesy for 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth. Time times half a time. 42 months. 1,260 days. Are all of them 3½ years? Yes, they are. Particularly when you're looking at the Jewish lunar month of 30 days. 42 times 30 is 1,260. 1,260 is 42 months. 3½ years. Time times and half a time. Something to think about. This trampling of the courts of the temple, underfoot for this length of time. And now we come to Revelation, the next chapter. Chapter 12 and verse 6. The woman, whoever she may be, fled, in verse 6, into the wilderness. A woman flees into a wilderness where she had a place prepared by God so that she might be nourished for 1,260 days. 42 months. Time times and half a time, 3½ years. I wonder if there was ever a time when a woman who represents something flees into a wilderness somewhere to a place prepared by God, and there she's nourished for what are equivalent expressions, all 4 of them. And now look at verse 13 and 14 in Revelation chapter 12. Good, doing well. Now in Revelation 12, verses 13 and 14. When the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. And the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman in order that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she was nourished for time, times, and half a time. Now, brethren, verse 13 and 14, verse 14, is precisely identical to verse 6. It uses a different expression, but the other 4 descriptive terms about this woman are also used in both passages. So the switch from 1,260 days to time, times, and half a time is teaching you that they're equivalent expressions, is designed precisely to persuade, to convince, and convict you so that you will be, incontrovertibly certain. These are equivalent expressions. They are referring to one and the same physical passage of time under the sun on the earth, not up in heaven, on the earth, somewhere, sometime. Now, at this point, I think at this point, most of my students, because I do take you for being more advanced students, if you waded through what I've done already and you're still here, it's got only two options. You're a true seeker or you're a knucklehead. I'm pretty sure you're a truth seeker or you wouldn't invest this much. Well, invest some more. I'm giving you homework. I'm going to treat you like an adult Christian. Look at these passages. Think about these passages during the week. Don't just show up here, one pass, and listen to me for an hour. That's like listening to a sermon in anybody's church building. Is it true or not? Well, I need to be tested like anybody else. Please do it. But hear me out, hear the fullness before you make up your mind. And there's another chapter in Revelation. 11 does this, 12 does this, and 13 does this. One might actually begin to think that maybe Revelation was trying to point us back to Daniel. And Daniel's prophecies are not really all that hard to understand. Maybe with the help of New Testament passages like Revelation, where events are soon and near and shortly to come to pass, if we can't figure Daniel out, from Daniel, maybe Revelation will teach us what he was talking about all those centuries before. Chapter 13 says this in the first 7 verses. He stood on the sand of the seashore, like the dragon, and I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. On his horns were 10 diadems. On his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard. Haven't we thought about a leopard somewhere not so distant past? And his feet were like those of a bear. Seems like I remember a bear too. His mouth was like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain. And his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. And they worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who's like the beast? And who is able to wage war against him? Well, Daniel 7 had somewhat to say about waging war and who wins and who loses and how long. And what those same people who lost will later receive. And there was given to him in verse 5 of Revelation 13 a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies. Whew, that kind of sounds like Daniel 7 too, doesn't it? And authority to act for 42 months was given to him. He opened his mouth and in blasphemies against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle. And that tabernacle is those who dwell in heaven. An expression we need to sort out. And it was given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, Daniel chapter 7. And authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him, Daniel 2 and 7. There's too much similarity to think that Daniel and Revelation are not talking about the same thing. There's just too much. Now, I know a lot of people tear into these passages and they cast this one over there and that one over there, and boy, they can see Gorbachev and everybody else in here. And I don't think so. I think we better stick with one scheme for interpretation that's stipulated on the pages, lest we be mistaken. So back to full screen again for you. I'm just going to tell you what the truth is. Don't just believe me. Go listen to the other classes in Daniel 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And 2 of them on 9 as I recall. See what you think. I'll send you the PowerPoint files to go along with them. They're audio only. But who is the Son of Man? Are you with me? It's Jesus, isn't it? Now, what judgment is this? I think it's the one that Jesus was talking about in Luke chapter 19, verses 11 through 27. So let's race back there. I believe I've got time for it. And let's go to Luke chapter 19. You know, just because a thing is identified as a parable does not preclude its also being a prophecy. We get, sometimes where we like to think of these as two totally different things, as if no parable could predict the future. Well, let's have a look at Luke 19. We're going to start reading in verse 11, and we're going to read all the way down to 27. It sounds like this. While they were listening to these things, oh, by the way, verse 10 says, the Son of Man. Seems like we heard that expression somewhere tonight, too. The Son of Man has come to seek and save that which was lost. And while they were listening to these things, he went on to tell a parable. Because he was near Jerusalem, they supposed the kingdom of God was going to appear immediately. And he said, therefore, no, it isn't. Now, that's what we'll get out of the passage. He didn't put those words in the text. But because they thought it was going to instantly appear, immediately appear, he sets about to disabuse them of that notion by saying, verse 12, a certain nobleman went to a distant country to receive a kingdom for himself. He went to a distant country to receive a kingdom. Have we been reading about something like that tonight? And then he was going to come back. He called 10 of his slaves and he gave them 10 minas, and he said to them, do business with this until I come back. But his citizens hated him, sent a delegation after him saying, we don't want this man to reign over us. And it came about that when he returned, after receiving the kingdom, which we've been reading about all night, he ordered that these slaves to whom he had given the money be called to him in order that he might know what business they had done. What have you been doing with what I gave you all this time, however long that time was? Verse 16, the first appeared, saying, Master, your minas made 10 minas more. And he said to him, well done, good slave, because you've been faithful in very little thing, be an authority over 10 cities. Second came, saying, your mina, master, has made 5 minas. And he said to him, you are to be over 5 cities. Another came, saying, Master, behold your mina, which I kept put away in a handkerchief, for I was afraid of you. Because you are an exacting man, you take up what you did not lay down and reap what you did not sow. And he said to him, by your own words I will judge you, you worthless slave. Did you know that I'm an exacting man, reaping what I did not sow? Then why did you not put the money in the bank? Having come, I would have collected it with interest. See, you haven't been doing anything with what I gave you while I'm away, but I'm coming back. Now he is back. And in verse 24, he said to the bystanders, take the mina away from him, give it to the one who has the 10 minas. They said to him, Master, he has 10 minas. I tell you that everyone who has shall more be given, but from the one who does not have, even what he does have shall be taken away. But these enemies of mine, who did not want me to reign over them. How long is the reign of the king over the eternal kingdom, and where is he while he reigns? These enemies of mine who did not want me to reign over them, bring them here and slay them in my presence. No, the kingdom is not coming immediately, but I am going away, Jesus tells them. I'm going to be gone long enough for you to trade with what I give you. And then when I come back, you better have been bringing in the sheaves. And if not, I'll have you killed before me when I get here. Now, that's what the parable says about a king in what I love to call parabolic drapery. This is the image of the parable. Did it never take place, brethren, in reality? Well, I believe that surely it did. I believe that this judgment we're talking about came in the 1st century. I think that little horn is Vespasian, the general sent by Nero, who would then, with Nero's suicide, become emperor, and whose son, Vespasian's son Titus, would then complete the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Here's another one of these charts, and I'm full screen for you here. Again, I can send it to you if you like. Charts like this are really, quite helpful, and I've included one in your syllabus. So let me come back here for just a second and see if I've got one. Hold on just a second. I know this is rude, but let's get this out. I've got the syllabus for you here, and I'll send anybody one who makes a request for it. I've got a similar chart, but a different one that's early on. It's in the introductory material in the syllabus as it is for this class. So have a look at that. But it looks like this, and it's Roman government starting with Julius Caesar as the first emperor. Now, again, the more advanced students immediately, kind of squirm in their seats. There's a lot of debate about when we should start naming emperors. Do we start counting with Julius, or do we start counting with Augustus, who's number 3 on this chart? Should he be number 1? I'm not going to discuss any of that now. We'll come to that all in good time. But you'll notice that if you do start with Julius, you get Vespasian as number 11 of the emperors over Rome. That might make him into an 11th horn. And then 3 kings will be subdued by that horn. I'm suggesting those 3 are Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, none of whom reigned for very long by any means. but each of whom was striving for the crown, while Vespasian was in Jerusalem in a war that would last, oh, what do you know? It lasts for 3.5 years. Maybe I should remember that for later. So here's that chart. I'm hoping that you'll spend a little time with that. But if you get into the later editions of my Daniel class, you'll be hearing a good deal more about it over there too. So now, who are these saints? The saints are the Jews. This is difficult, I know, at first. We never think of a saint as being unholy. We never think of a saint as being unworthy. But a spittoon is holy in New Testament Greek-speaking jargon. Anything that is set apart for a particular purpose, whether that purpose is high and grand or low and disgusting, doesn't matter. Set apart is all it means for whatever the purpose is. So I think that these saints are members of a kingdom you could get into because you were born into it. And that's all it took. But then there's this new king who's going to ask that this membership be of the heart and not a matter of birth. Who are these saints? There's been Jews who are God's holy people, the saints, for entirety of the Old Testament, who wages war against them for times and half a time. 66 to 70 AD, September of 70 is the month in which the temple's actually burned. That 11th horn and his son were waging war. When were the saints overpowered? The unworthy Jews, who had long been the chosen people of God by birth, were warned, slay them here in my presence, because I have come back. The Son of Man has come. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that expression, the coming of the Son of Man. And once again, brethren, then, the worthy saints, the first fruits of the old kingdom, the saints who are born again of water and the Spirit, the 3,000 baptized in Acts chapter 2 and verses 38 and following there at all those mikvahs, in the south wall of the Temple Mount or below, the staircase there. Those people possess it now with no rivals to claim that they got the wrong kingdom. When 70 AD is done, there aren't any Jews, Levites, temple, worship. It's all gone. So what do we look at tonight? We had Daniel chapter 2, 4 successive kingdoms. And that statue, look closely now, does not have air between the ankles and the feet so that all, from ankles up is floating 10 feet in the air and the poor feet lying there all alone. They're connected. And we have seen that in Daniel 2, Daniel 7, and next week we'll start with Daniel 8. Read it. We will see that these things all line up and should not be misunderstood. They only are misunderstood, I believe, now primarily misunderstood because people have an agenda. They got something stuck in their head they've been taught for years and they just have a hard time giving it up. Well, it's time to quit. And so here we go. How did I do? 804. That's not too bad. All right. So, be warned, when I did this Zoom class not too long ago for a very select chosen few, I did an hour and a half on more than one occasion, as I recall. An hour and 15 was not so rare. So I'll let you advanced college level, serious homework, accomplishing students then, get busy and get used to me going over every so often. Love you all. Love you more if you contact me in some way, but don't try on the chat because I'll never see it. And don't try on Facebook because I probably won't see it till next year. As a matter of fact, I looked at Facebook here today and discovered that sometime back in 2019, an individual I knew in high school 50 years ago was saying, "Do you remember me?" And I didn't know they'd said anything a year ago plus, until today. So there you go. I hope that's helpful. If you didn't get it all, I didn't expect you to, but if you go to work, it'll take shape and it gets better next week. Stick with me, baby. See you then.